Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate this vote for me over the beach. That is pretty fantastic. I hope that I can make your last 45 minutes of the day or so pretty enjoyable and worthy of the non-beach vote. So I've come to talk a little bit about community building stuff and my experiences around that and how they relate to open source. Some of the things that I think I kind of go to open source to find in some cases where I can't find it elsewhere. And hopefully somewhere in there you guys can see some insights into ways that you can both participate, contribute, and manage open source projects in ways that maybe you haven't quite thought about before. So just to start off, make sure that people are awake or whatever, and because I'm curious to see if I can actually get very much participation. If you could just raise both hands if you use open source. All right, I think this is most everybody not touching their laptop for like a second, so that's progress. I'm glad that you're paying attention. All right, and if you contribute to open source, if you could keep your hands up. So it's actually like a pretty good number of people that do both, and that I'm glad. Those of you that only had your hands up for one of them, I'll see what I can do about that. If you have any questions or anything about how you can do that, and it's not clear by the end of this, by all means talk to me, because I really like helping people to do that. One of the best parts of my weeks and days is frequently when someone comes up to me and says, you know, here, this is my first pull request that I'm giving to your project. Like, that is just a great feeling to know that I'm helping someone to start being a part of what I feel is a really great community that has certainly given me a lot. So, where does my experience from this come from? Like, what gives me the right or knowledge to talk about this sort of stuff? That would be Fog. So, again, how many people have used Fog? How many people have heard of Fog, at least? So that is also a discrepancy that I would like to fix, but that's neither here nor there, really. So that's cool. I'm glad that some of you have used it and that more of you have heard of it. But for those of you that haven't, it's I guess the simplest way is to kind of say that it's a cloud computing ORM. So in the same way that sort of like Active Record is a way to have pretty much the same interface to Postgres or MySQL or what have you, Fog tries to do the same thing with different cloud things. So whether it be S3 or rack-space storage or rack-space compute versus Amazon's EC2, it tries to provide some common interfaces so that you don't need to get down into the nitty-gritty immediately. You can actually start getting some work done that is common between them. And it's been a very interesting project. I've certainly learned a ton from it technically. Like, I would say that in a lot of ways I am a cloud expert now, where I was not at all when I started this. But it's also taught me a lot about open source and what that can provide that if we just go to it for that. So to give you some background, the first year that I worked on Fog, I spent some time on it almost every day outside of work because I had other things going on at work, so it wasn't really something I could dedicate time to. I had a sense that it was important. It was important because I didn't know anything about cloud, and it seemed that I needed to because it was something that was becoming more and more important. And it also felt like something that was lacking. Like, I wanted this tool and it was not available, so I decided that I was going to try to do something about it. Those things are good. I think that's decent reasoning. That's a good reason to start a project. The problem is that over time it became this sort of like DIY death march thing where I had good motivation to start, but it became harder and harder to continue to be motivated to do that because I had learned a lot now and I did know about cloud computing, so that motivation was kind of gone. And like just grinding on this day after day was really difficult to keep myself motivated, especially when it was hard to convince anyone to use it because they already had AWS S3 or they already had some other library that they were using. Why did they need another one, right? So there are reasons that they might need another one, but it was hard to convince them, right? So like this was just frustrating, and I felt myself losing motivation, losing confidence that this was something that was valuable and that I should continue on it, and that was awful, right? Like so, moving into that a little bit deeper, there were good things, right? I was starting to get more adoption. But in some ways, that was more a liability than a benefit, because now all of a sudden, I had this even larger base of people who were running into even more edge cases that I'd never thought of that I had to support, right? Or that's what it continued to feel like, because it was pretty much me that was doing it. So I would suddenly capture this person that finally I convinced them that they would try it, and they run into this weird edge case that I spend the entire weekend fixing because I really want to capture that extra user because I've had so much trouble convincing them in the first place to try it. So along the way with that, my code base starts expanding pretty quickly. The benefit to that is that there's more capability. There's perhaps better error handling, but the downside is that now I have more that I need to potentially load into my head or that I need to dig back through on a day-to-day basis to fix these bugs as they come in. And ultimately, I'm having this growing time commitment where I used to spend half an hour or 45 minutes on it because I enjoyed learning about cloud computing, and now I'm spending an hour or 2 hours every day just responding to bug reports because I don't want this project to come crashing down under its own weight and probably crush me in the process. So overall, I ended up in this sort of downward spiral where I sort of dreaded more and more working on this, and I became less and less excited about the project in general. And I think that this is a danger that a lot of open source projects are open to, or really just projects in general. So hopefully, coming out of this, you'll see some ways that you can avoid getting into this situation like I did. But it's a refactoring thing, right? I went down a dead end for a while, and then I realized that I needed to rework the way that I was doing this in order to better facilitate and not be dreadful. So in the second year, I started really focusing on two things, I would say. One is building more community around it so that other people were involved, so that other people were helping me with some of this burden, and so that other people could share the excitement that I originally had and perhaps did not originally do the best job of conveying. And also that there was a sense of continuity, right? Because I knew that I was getting burned out. So eventually, there would come a time when I probably could not continue to do this, right? So how can I find a way to get other people to step up who still have that excitement and can reinvigorate my excitement and keep this project going, keep it moving forward? So the community did grow. This is great. We get more and more contributors this year, more and more people that are actually starting to have commit bit and adding more and more code. It became clearly more sustainable, and over time, the amount of time that I'm actually spending on it has gone down a lot. Now, instead of spending all of my time doing this low-level coding stuff, I actually do a lot more, something that's a lot more akin to project management, I would say, which is maybe a dreadful idea to some programmers, but it's actually been really rewarding for me because instead of just this sort of traditional role of that where it might be like, all right, we have these 10 tasks, so you have to do this one, and you have to do that one, and you have to do this one. It's more a situation where people come in and say, I'm really excited about this particular thing, but I don't have the background yet to do it. Can you help me? And it's really rewarding to be like, actually, yes, I can help you, and that would be amazing because that's one fewer thing that I need to worry about, and I'm struggling. So yes, definitely, what can I do? Like, just, ask away. So the nice thing was, I got from having all of this dread to now being excited. And, now somebody opens an issue and I'm like, this is great. This is a chance for me to interact with someone who is interested in this software already and maybe just doesn't realize that they're looking for an opportunity to contribute. So how can I convert this person from passing interest into somebody that's actively engaged and that can solve their own problems? How can I empower this person to be an open source contributor? So before, I was kind of in this maintenance mode, right? And it was all about fixing issues as soon as possible, right? And so for me, this is kind of the difference between a gardener and somebody that does topiary, right? I think that's the right word. I would rather be doing a creative pursuit. I'd rather be sculpting these crazy hedge sculpture things, right? Making these huge elephants or whatever, than necessarily just trimming the bush so that it's still 3 feet high and 2 feet deep. And that's maybe not for everyone, but for me at least, I did not want to just be in this situation where all I was trying to do was make sure that the house didn't fall over, right? It's not really interesting. Every day I didn't want to just go back out and lean against the house to make sure that it didn't collapse, right? So, there was originally this sort of idea that all I was trying to do was make sure that the house didn't fall down, because if it did, it would be obvious that I was an incompetent builder, and I had hoped that that was not really the case. But I was young enough especially that I wasn't confident that it wasn't the case, right? There might have actually been some terrible deficit in the code that I just didn't realize yet, so I was always fighting to make sure that that didn't come out. That if there was, I was the one that found it instead of somebody else. And I realized that the much better place to be was in this sort of mentor role, right? So it wasn't about fixing the issue as soon as possible. It was about opening a discussion about the issue as soon as possible, seeing where that person was really coming from, how they got to that issue, right? Is it that they did something that I just never thought of? Is it that they did something that everybody does, but it's not well documented, and maybe most people happen to have this background that this person doesn't, so they didn't realize that this one step is always necessary, but it wasn't in the documentation, right? Or whatever it might be. Sometimes the actual issue that appears to be presented to you and the issue that needs to be solved are not the same thing, right? So it's really important to discuss it instead and try as much as possible to find out how you can help this person help themselves, right? Because that might be that, oh, well, ultimately what we need to do is add these 2 extra lines into the README, and then no one will ever have this problem again, including you, and you now know how you can get help, right? Maybe it's just asking me, but maybe I can point you and say, well, here are the parts of the code where it actually makes it necessary that these 2 lines of the README be there, right? And next time if you run into another problem that's related to that, you can point to that. Or if you find out that somebody else has run into this problem, you see a Stack Overflow question or whatever, you now can answer that question. So this sort of very counterintuitive lesson I learned over time is that one of the worst things I ever did for my open source project was to solve the bugs. It was just a terrible idea. It was just burning me completely out, and I couldn't keep up. And this may not be the case for every project. I certainly have other open source projects where this is not nearly as much the case as Fog, and I'd be happy to go into why I think there are some differences there. But for Fog, fixing the bugs was actually a huge mistake, right? Getting the bugs fixed was not a huge mistake, and more often than not, I've been able to convert the people that are having the problem into people that are solving those problems, right? And so I'll go into that a little bit more, and hopefully that will be informative to all of you as well. The other thing that I think was a big change was what I was trying to get out of it, right? Before, it was a lot about learning, right? I hacked a lot because I didn't quite know what these interfaces looked like. I didn't quite know how EC2 worked, right? That was the whole reason that I came into this, is like, I want to understand cloud computing, and I don't. So I hacked around the problem until I understood cloud, at least in some working sense, even if I don't exactly know the nitty-gritty. And now, excuse me, it's more about teaching, right? So instead of hacking myself, it's about advising hackers so that they can skip over some of those gotchas, skip over some of those rough spots that I had to go through, because now that I've gone through them and I've released this as open source, why should somebody else have to suffer through those same 3 steps over again, right? Like, we are sharing the fact that that is not a problem anymore. We're distributing the suffering, so to speak. So hopefully that others can just skip past that and get right to the part where they're doing something amazing. They've been empowered by this. So it came to be something where I was sharing the cloud instead of just learning it for myself, right? Which ultimately, I think the lesson to that is just that, and this one is perhaps more intuitive, I hope, that the group of people working together was much more powerful than me working by myself. Like, I can't possibly keep all of the code base of Fog in my head anymore. It's like 30 or 40 or 50,000 lines of code or something. Like, there's tons of stuff in there that I've never even touched, right? Somebody else wrote it. Somebody else accepted the contribution. It is greater than I am, which is amazing. I recommend having a project like that if you can manage it. So the thing is, you've started these discussions, but where do you go from there, right? And in some sense, and this is where open source deviates, again, from sort of the traditional project management sort of situation, is that it's easy for us to imagine, in some sense, although this doesn't really happen as much as it maybe did in the 80s, as I gather, or whatever, but this sort of idea that getting paid a certain number of dollars per line of code that you produce, right? We can understand that. That's not exactly how we get paid generally, but it kind of is, right? You know, like, you get paid for your hours or paid based on salary, but you're kind of expected to output a certain amount of code. When you're working in open source land, that is not really the case, though, right? So what is it that you're providing these people if it isn't money, if you would like to keep them motivated and keep them engaged, right? So, you know, in a lot of ways, this sort of idea of like providing a certain number of inspirations to the person for each line of code that they produce is a lot less intuitive. It's a lot less clear how we actually approach that. So I think it's important to think about some of the key motivators that are intrinsic, right? Because that is more what we're looking at in the open source world, and something that I think has kept me coming back to the open source world at times where, like, growing up in the Midwest in Iowa, there wasn't a huge development community. So there were a lot of times where like I wanted to grow as a programmer, but there weren't people that I could easily turn to do that. So I turned to open source to find those people, right? Because they could be anywhere then. Or if I'm at a job where, which has happened a couple times to me, I've gotten kind of bored, right? I'm disengaging. I'm having a hard time sort of continuing to enjoy programming because the job isn't providing that to me. I've turned to open source as a way to have still that enjoyment and remember that excitement that was kindled within me that set me down this path in the first place. So the key motivators that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to do this, the first of them is autonomy, right? So I think it's really important that when you engage in these discussions with people and you're talking to them about helping you on your open source project, you should not be saying, here on this line, you should change this character. On this other line, you should make this very specific change. You should say, oh, well, I think we have a problem. I think in broad, high-level terms, this is what we're talking about. Here may be a couple files that you should look at. Here's some documentation that will be helpful. But leave it to them to figure out exactly how they want to put those pieces together, right? There's plenty of opportunities. The pull request system is pretty amazing in terms of if they make a mistake in that process, you can deal with it afterward. You don't need to try to tell them every single thing they're going to do along the way, or they are going to hate you and never come back, probably. So it's important to still give them that freedom to work within the construct of your project. The next one is mastery, and this is one that I've turned to open source for again and again, because it's very easy within a particular job to get to a point where you pretty much know the ropes. You're kind of just repeating the same thing on a day-to-day basis. But you can go to an open source project and something that you're a little bit less familiar with, and it's very easy to ratchet up what you know about whatever that open source project might be covering. And by actually contributing and working closely with the people that are committing on it, that are actually experts, this is definitely an area where it can be easy to ratchet up that level of mastery that you have in whatever the project might be focused on. And the last one is purpose, which I think is also really valuable, right? So as I said, for Fog, for me, there were kind of two things. One was learning cloud, and one was empowering people to be able to do cool things because they didn't have to first think about infrastructure. They could move past the infrastructure right to doing the cool stuff. And I wanted to share that as much as possible with people, and I think I still do. So a lot of people that are coming in and contributing are people that have already taken what I've given them and are already doing something cool, but then they hit an edge where they were like, we did something really cool for 3 weeks, and then we wanted to do this other cool thing, and something was missing. We got stuck. How can we get to having that 4th week of really cool stuff? And you say, oh, well, I can help you with that, right? You should look at this line, and you should check out these 2 files, and I think we need to do something roughly like, this other part of the software, and we can pull these things together, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, but that is where, you draw the line. So the first is autonomy, again, and to go into a little bit more specific, it's all about giving help and not orders, right? This is the project management sort of maybe traditionally, hopefully not at any place that we work as much as possible, because I at least don't work in this situation very well, but it's all about giving them the help that they need to do the things within your project, not giving them orders of what they're going to do or how they're going to do it. And mastery is about both teaching and learning. I learned a lot at first when I was working on Fog by just producing lots of code that did things, but I think in a lot of ways I learn even more now by coaching someone through writing a service that I've never even heard of, right? Like I learn a lot about what those different services do and don't do, what holes I may have left in the interface the first time through because I didn't realize that there was this class of problems that is out there that, things like that. Like I learn a lot through my interactions with these people that I would not otherwise. Another big one for me, which comes also from this, is as I mentor these people, I think that it is really valuable for me to gain that extra perspective. Like I'm so related to the project now that I do not have a good perspective from the outside of what it is like to work on or use my project anymore. So anytime I interact with these people that are new, that are coming in, that are saying, I've used this project for the first time, I'm 3 weeks in, I ran into this bug, I'm like, oh, I can see how it would be really easy to not realize you needed to do these 2 things. It's not documented anywhere. I'm amazed that somebody hasn't run into this before, but I would never think of it because I have, the configuration file is on all of my laptops already. I never run into the problem that the config file is missing, right? Like it just doesn't happen to me. Like little things like that you just don't see unless you have these new people coming in and continuing to kindle the fire. So purpose, a big part of this, I think, is to take great care in the language that you use within these discussions. I have been accused more than once of being overly sort of flowery with my language, especially by people within like support or other things. They're like, well, you've solved the problem. You don't need to say like please and thank you 10 extra times at the end of it. But I think in a lot of cases you actually do, right? It doesn't really take me that much extra time, and I really am thankful. And emotion is hard to convey within textual information, right? So like if I'm thankful, I want to say, could you please try this? I would really appreciate it. I do appreciate what you have done. Thank you. Is there anything else I can do? Like, it's because I really feel that way, and I need to say it 4 times because they can't see my face. They can't see that emotion that I have that, yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you have taken your time without me paying you money or anything else to come in and help me out on something that we can both benefit from. That's amazing. Like, really thank you. So, as much as possible, I try to use that as an opportunity to broadcast the excitement that I do have and try to make sure that they can share in that, because it is awesome, and I don't want to just take all the credit for this project. Like, I did work my butt off on it for a while. I still work on it a lot, but like, it wasn't me that made this project. It was all the people that have contributed to it, which is an ever-growing number, thankfully. For you, those of you that, however, are not maintaining an open source project, I think there's still a lot to be gained from this. Sort of what can little old me do because I'm not running this big project? How is this really helpful to me? I skipped forward too much. So one of the big things I think is, and something that I try to do, is not every maintainer, one second. Dramatic pause. Not every maintainer is going to have the same outlook on this that I do. For better or worse, I don't know. It's worked really well for me. Your mileage may vary, of course, but that doesn't mean that you can't do what I usually do now, which is that if I actually run into a bug on somebody's project, if I file an issue, I don't say, you did this wrong. I say, this seems to be a problem, what can I do, right? I don't know enough about your project yet to fix this, but if you can give me some guidance, I really do want to fix this. Like, I don't want you to fix this, actually. I want to fix this. I want to learn more. I want to understand what's going on, and unfortunately, I do not yet understand. But if you could give me a little bit of your time, I can make this happen, right? So consider, as you work on open source and as you see these opportunities, what kind of language you are using also towards maintainers, because I think that can really influence the way that they react to you. If you just come in and say, you broke this, right? You released a minor version and it is broken now. It's unlikely that they're going to respond in like a happy, friendly, oh, what can we do about this? How can I help, right? They're going to be like, oh, whoa, whoa. All right, it's time for me to be on the defensive now. So first off, you're a jerk. And then I don't even know. I'm not even going to fix this bug because it was a jerk that reported it, so it must not really be an important bug, right? I mean, it sets things on a really bad foot. And unfortunately, I can attest to, as someone who works on a somewhat large open source project now, it is all too common to get discouraged as a maintainer of these projects because almost all of the feedback you get is through issues. So it can be easy at times to feel like everybody hates you and that your project is awful because almost all you ever get is, you broke this. What is wrong with you? This was the most important use case because it's my use case, and it is not a use case that works anymore. You should never do this again. You're a terrible human being, whatever. Which I'm sure is not how most people feel about it. Most people just don't tell me anything at all. And so, unfortunately, silence can be deafening, I suppose. Anyway, things to think about. So ultimately, it's really important, I think, to realize that these conversations really define the contexts in which you'll interact with these people. Whether you're maintaining, whether you're contributing, the way that you talk to these people is going to define what the outcome is. This is something that I've talked about before, where it's the sort of idea that content is this bridge between creators and consumers. This is how I used to think about it, which I think is somewhat flawed. And that I used to also say that comments were the area under the bridge where the trolls live, right? But there's a number of things that I think are wrong with this, right? And ultimately, that is because I think that it should be a bridge between people, not from one to another, right? I shouldn't be maintaining this project because I am a prophet from on high that has come down with the magic stones that tell you what the commandments are or something, right? I should be maintaining this because it's helping me and it's helping you and it is valuable, right? So as much as possible, let's build these bridges instead of perhaps tearing them down or whatever it is that we do to them right now. Sometimes I don't even know what we're doing to them. So we should help others to help ourselves as much as possible, whether that be as a maintainer who's trying to help bootstrap these people that are new to the project, help them with the documentation problems that they don't understand, help them to fix the issues that they're running into, just really solving as many of those problems as possible by helping them to be better developers, right? That is how you build community, is by building other people up. Because ultimately, the community isn't the software, right? The community is the people that are in it. So as much as possible, I think that there's an important value to focusing on the people within open source instead of just the lines of code. And try to consume less and actually collaborate more, right? We use open source all the time, so I'm looking for opportunities when I can to give back, to help out, So I hope that we can all do that, right? And if any of you have questions about any of this, by all means, hit me up. I'm happy to try to tell you at least what my experience has been like. In the same way that I like to mentor these individuals that are working on my project, I'd be happy to provide any answers to questions you might have about other projects you're working on or other situations. I think probably we will have time for questions. So there's a lot of these little things. So keep in mind this sort of idea of, it shouldn't be you broke it. It should be, how can I help? How can we move this forward? Not, this is what happened and it's awful, but what can we do now? Where are we headed? And this sort of hopefully also deals with this ultimate problem, which is sort of like, oh, I'm just going to fork your project because it's gone in this terrible way. Because you're already having conversations along the way, right? Like it shouldn't turn to this point where suddenly you're at such a different point sort of philosophically about how this problem should be solved that you need to write a whole new project that duplicates all of this effort that people have made in order to make this other philosophical choice, because you should be having those discussions earlier on, and you should understand where each other are coming from so that you know why that decision was made, because I, at least, as a naiver, younger person, have more than once basically started to fork and rewrite something and then been like, oh, that's why they did that. And there's no reason that I should have had to come to that conclusion on my own a week into a project, right? There's no reason I should have probably forked it in the first place, but that's a whole other can of worms. And ultimately, I think it should become not you should, but we could, right? How can we move this forward? What can we do? So a little bit of homework. First off, as you're interacting with these people, as you're doing things, try to seek this engagement through conversation, right? There's all these opportunities in the interactions that we have every day that I think get overlooked, right? We make the conversation about the problem and not about the people. And do what you can to keep that motivation flowing. It can be all too easy in a big open source project, like I said, getting nothing but negative feedback, working your butt off to fix these issues or whatever else. It can be easy to lose sight of the goal and to not be happy and excited about it anymore. So do what you can to keep the motivation flowing, both for the creators and for, the people that are participating. I highly encourage you, if you have a project that you use all the time and you really love it, to just let the person that works on that project, that maintains it, know that you really appreciate that. It can really brighten their days. I've seen more than one person do it, and it's awesome. Just go on Twitter and say, hey, thank you for this project. I really appreciate it. It is amazing. And ultimately, skip the bugs and fix the misunderstandings, right? Because that's what the root of almost all of these problems are going to be. The person doesn't understand where you're coming from or vice versa. That is more often the bug in the software, not some line of code or some misplaced character. And ultimately, just be the culture you want to see, right? So I would be happy to answer any questions. I know that's kind of a high-level thing. Some people maybe have particular experiences that differ or whatever. Or you guys can just go out and be on the beach or something. I took your half an hour-ish, greedily gobbled it up. Other than that, I can put contact info or whatever. I'm Geemus, Geemus, on GitHub and Twitter, and at Gmail if you need to talk to me about anything or have further questions. I work at Heroku. It's pretty cool. I guess we're hiring. There's a few of us around. You can find us pretty easily. There's really no questions? I'm glad that I have solved all of your open source problems. Thank you for allowing me to do that this afternoon. And yeah, thanks everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this, and it's been a great conference. So thanks to everybody for having me, and thanks. Hope you guys have a good night.